Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Allie Ingersoll. History could repeat itself this political season, polling is showing. North Carolina could once again vote for a Republican president while simultaneously putting a Democrat in the governor's mansion. WRAL State Capitol reporter Brian Murphy talks with me today about the latest polling. Thanks so much for being here with me today, Murph. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So what exactly are the latest polls showing on the presidential side?
Yeah, this is a new poll out Monday from Meredith College, and it shows an interesting race. Donald Trump at 41%, Joe Biden at 39%, and if those numbers seem pretty low, it's because they included Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he's polling at 9% in North Carolina. Previously in February, it was Trump 44, Biden 39. That did not have third-party candidates. So the race appears to be tightening, and that's what we've seen in some polling kind of across the country, is that Biden is starting to make some progress and is starting to cut into Trump's lead a little bit.
Talk to me a little about who is Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, well, I mean, Kennedy is probably the biggest name in Democratic politics over the last century, really. He is the nephew of John F. Kennedy. He is the son of Robert F. Kennedy, who wasn't president, but certainly seemed headed that way. And he is, he made his career as an environmental lawyer. And so he appeals to a lot of Democrats on that part of his life. But he's also become, an anti-vaxxer, very against vaccinations, which appeals to some Republicans. In this part of his life, he's very against kind of corporate money. He's argued a lot about the balancing the budget and wasteful government spending. So he's kind of picking and choosing from a lot of different issues that impact both Republicans and Democrats. He is going to get on the ballot, it appears, in North Carolina. He's got a new party called the We the People Party. It's a lot easier for a party to get on the ballot than an individual. The We the People Party says it has enough signatures to get on the ballot in North Carolina, and that Kennedy will be nominated as their nominee as soon as that happens. The State Board of Elections is still working to verify all those signatures. That has to be done at the county level, then again at the state level. And so we don't know for sure, but they have turned in way more than the number of signatures needed to get on the ballot.
9% seems pretty significant.
Yeah, he was at 12% in a Quinnipiac poll that came out recently here in North Carolina. And that is significant. Elections in North Carolina between Republicans and Democrats are not decided by that large of margin. We're talking about very close races usually. And for a third-party candidate to be polling 12% or 9% is a lot.
So you did talk about some other previous polling. Talk to me a little about that with the Biden and Trump in specific. So are those numbers looking the same, or is Kennedy kind of really actually making an impact here? Yeah,
those are the only two that have Kennedy in. So there was a Mason-Dixon poll that came out last week. It had Trump 49, Biden 43. There was a Quinnipiac poll that had Trump 48, Biden 46. Then they also polled with third-party candidates, and that's where you got the 41, 38, 12. So you can see it really lowers both numbers. And then WRAL, of course, did a poll, I think in February or late February, early March, that found Trump at 50 and Biden at 45, again, no Kennedy. What we're seeing is Kennedy's pulling from both candidates. And I think that is because there's a lot of people, and we found this throughout polling, that are just sort of dissatisfied with both of their choices. They don't love the idea of a rematch. Obviously, both of these candidates are very old. They've both been in the public eye for a long, long time. They want, I don't want to say most, but many voters want other options. And for lack of a better option, Robert F. Kennedy is kind of standing in as that other option that they at least want choices.
Even though he comes from this legacy family that's involved in politics, he is a different name, and he really has not been, as you said, president before, as we know. So that is what makes him different.
Yeah, very unusual to have two presidents running against each other. I mean, it has happened at times in American history, but it's been a long time, I think, since maybe Teddy Roosevelt ran for re-election after being out of the office. So we're talking about the early 1900s, the last time a race featured at least two people who had been president of the United States.
And then also talking about people wanting something different, thinking about voter registration numbers. We know that the people who are registering as independent is really going up here in the state.
Yeah, it's huge. It's the largest group of voters is the independent or unaffiliated in North Carolina language. Unaffiliated voters are a bigger block than Republican voters, and they are, if they have not passed Democrats, they are very close to passing Democrats and seemingly will pass them anytime soon. any moment now. And I think we haven't really been able to figure out the reasons why. I mean, I think one is frustration with both parties. People don't want to be affiliated with these parties that they don't think represent them in full, right? You may agree with some things the Democrats or some things the Republicans, but there's enough things you disagree with that you don't want to be associated with them. I think some of it is politics has gotten so divisive, and registration, your voter registration is public, that people just don't want people to know, which party they affiliate with. And maybe that's because of their job. If they're a teacher or a reporter or a fire chief or a police captain, maybe you just rather your neighbors not know which party you're affiliated with. And then lastly, I think the younger generation. I don't think younger people want to be, we're seeing a disaffiliation of all kinds of things across American society. And I think political parties are just another example of that.
So let's shift gears a tiny bit here, still staying political, though, obviously. What's going on with the governor's race?
The governor's race is really interesting because you would think, okay, all these numbers are really good for Donald Trump. He's leading in every one of these polls, even if it's a little bit closer. That's not the case in the gubernatorial race between Attorney General Josh Stein and Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Robinson is the Republican, and he's trailing. Josh Stein is leading in this new Meredith poll that was released on Monday, 45-36. That's 9 points. That's quite a margin. It's outside of the margin of error, or what they call the confidence interval now. It's up from 4 points, a 4-point difference in the February poll. So Stein's lead appears to be growing. He's leading with both men and women. He's leading with black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters. He's leading with every age group, which I thought was very interesting. He leads with those with some college, those with bachelor's degrees, those with graduate or professional degrees, and he leads in urban and suburban areas. Robinson, obviously leads among a much smaller group of people. He leads with white voters. He leads with those who have completed high school and those who live in rural areas. But when you mix all the numbers together, he's down by 9 points. And I think that's what's interesting is this is not uncommon. This is a state that has voted for the Republican candidate for president in 10 of the last 11 elections. Only Barack Obama in 2008 narrowly squeaked out a victory. But it also votes for Democrats to be governor. And we've seen that time and time again. Donald Trump has carried this state twice. Each time Roy Cooper won and became the Democratic governor.
Why is this common that it happens in North Carolina?
That's a great question because ticket splitting, voting for one party for one office and another party for a different office is increasingly rare. I mean, as we're seeing the nationalization of every election, people are really voting much more straight line tickets. But here in North Carolina, obviously that governor-president divide, we really have a governor divide with everything else. I mean, we've elected Republican after Republican to the U.S. Senate. Obviously, Republicans run both the House and the Senate in the state. So it seems to be that governor is one place where Democrats have been able to hold on. I think part of it is they, put up a lot of moderate candidates for governor. You have to be able to appeal to a wide section. There's still some issues that I think people trust Democrats on more than Republicans, particularly when it comes to education, and some issues that the governor really has more impact on than, say, a president or a U.S. senator. And I mean, I guess it goes without saying that Mark Robinson has made some controversial remarks in the past. He's not the cleanest candidate. And when I say, scandal free, or he does keep popping up in the news for reasons that really have nothing to do with politics. Mm-hmm. And so that may be hurting him a little bit. He is endorsed by Trump. He was set to appear at Trump's rally in Wilmington, which got canceled for weather. And so it'll be interesting to see if Trump can carry Robinson over the finish line, or if Stein's strength somehow ends up helping Biden. We see people just revert back to kind of that straight ticket. It'll be really interesting, and I think both of those races are races to watch.
We'll have much more to talk about after this break. Welcome back. So, Murph, all of this information comes from polling. How exactly does polling work?
That's a great question, and certainly polling has been under fire, I think, for a long time now, probably at least several election cycles. And I would say, the way polling works, there's phone calls polling, which is increasingly difficult because people don't answer cell phone calls that you don't know where they're coming from. There's online polling. And so the pollsters are really having to work very hard to get good information back. And the biggest advice that I have in having covered lots of polling and lots of politics is to never sort of pin all your hopes on one poll. But if you look at polls in the aggregate, I mean, this poll, I think, was 700 people that they spoke to. I listed off 4 or 5 polls, all between 600, 700, 800, up to 1,100 people. When you start to aggregate polls, you start to get a sense of, okay, they've talked to 20,000 people when it's all said and done. So I think any one poll can have problems with the sample that it got. Maybe it overrepresented a group. Maybe its mixing was wrong. But when you get a large collection of polls and they're all pointing in generally the same direction, I think you have a good sense of, okay, that may be where this race stands at the moment.
So you've covered politics for a long time. I think what I'm like really curious about is how do political parties use polling information? Do they change their strategies based off of what they're seeing from polling or anything like that?
Yeah, and they're also doing lots of internal polling that we'll never see. A lot of message polling. I listened to the old school hip hop station here in the Raleigh area. And if you listen to that station, you will hear targeted ads at the African-American community from the Biden campaign. They are ads speaking directly to black voters saying, hey, black voters, this is what happened under Donald Trump and this is what's happened under Joe Biden, and listing lots of different things, including the capping of insulin prices at $35. And so, the campaigns have much more sophisticated polling than even Meredith or Quinnipiac or some of the names that you'll hear. And they are really targeting specific messages to specific groups of people. I mean, one thing that I think particularly the Biden campaign is probably working on are Nikki Haley voters. Who are the people who voted for Nikki Haley in the primary, and how receptive are they to a message of voting for Joe Biden in November? You can really narrow that down. You can find out who requested Republican ballots during the primary. Maybe they voted Democrat in the last election primary. And you can kind of get a sense of who they are based on their demographics. Do they have college degrees? Do they live in these zip codes? And they will then turn that information into action, whether you hit them with direct mail, the stuff that shows up in your mailbox, or text messages, or you tailor messages to the social media site or the news organizations that they might be listening to the most. So polling is a key part of political campaigns in the 2020s. And I imagine that both the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign, the Stein campaign and the Robinson campaign have volumes and volumes of data, even more granular than the information we're getting publicly.
So it's only April. How many more polls can we really expect?
Well, North Carolina is a state that both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign have devoted resources to. I mentioned earlier that Trump was supposed to be here over the weekend, had to cancel because of bad weather, but he had attracted a large crowd in Wilmington. We've seen President Biden and Vice President Harris making routine stops here in North Carolina. North Carolina was not one of the 6 key states last year that Biden actually swept all 6, and that's how he won the White House. But if Biden were to lose one of those, and we're talking Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and then the 3 Midwest states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio, and Wisconsin, North Carolina, I think, is the next state. It's kind of the fail-safe state. So if Biden, and there is some polling that's showing Biden slumping in some of those 6 states, North Carolina seems to be, at least from the Biden perspective, the next state that they're targeting and saying, okay, if we're going to lose a Michigan or we're going to lose an Arizona, let's go after North Carolina as a state to flip. From the Trump campaign, I think they have to hold on to North Carolina. They've got to flip some of these other states, but they have to hold on to North Carolina. And so I think we're going to see a lot of polling because it is an important state. And then secondly, on the governor side, it's one of the key governor races in all of the country. Given what's happening in the legislature, there's almost no chance that Democrats flip one of the houses in North Carolina. And so the only thing stopping North Carolina from being a trifecta state, which is when you hold both the governor's mansion and both chambers, is a Democrat winning the governor's mansion. And so there's a lot of national attention on North Carolina from Democrats hoping to avoid it being a trifecta state, and from Republicans hoping that it is a trifecta state, which would allow them to pass legislation and move things more quickly that they want to do. So there's a lot of attention on North Carolina, both at the presidential level and the governor's level.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about between now and November. Thanks so much, Murph, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. If you listen to this podcast on WRAL.com or the WRAL News app, you can also find it in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.